Soviet Law 58. In 1934, the Soviet Union introduced Law 58 to punish anti-Soviet behavior. The law was vague, allowing anyone to be arrested for speaking out, telling a joke, or even being accused without evidence. People didn't need to be guilty. Suspicion alone was enough. Millions were arrested under this law, and many were sent to gulags, forced labor camps with harsh conditions. Prisoners worked long hours in freezing temperatures, often without proper food or medical care. Thousands died. What made this law especially cruel was that it didn't spare children. Kids as young as 12 could be executed or imprisoned. Some were punished simply because of their parents' alleged actions. Law 58 created a climate of fear across the country. People were afraid to speak, even in private. Neighbors, co-workers, and even family members turned on each other. The government used this fear to silence opposition and control the population. A single whisper could cost someone their life. Damnatio memoriae. In ancient Rome, there was a law called damnatio memoriae, which means condemnation of memory. This law allowed the Roman state to completely erase someone from public history. It was often used against emperors, politicians, or generals who had fallen out of favor. Once declared, their names were removed from inscriptions, statues were destroyed or defaced, and official records were changed to pretend they never existed. What made this law especially cruel was that it didn't just punish the person, it tried to erase their entire identity. Even family members could suffer consequences for speaking their name or honoring their memory. It was a legal form of erasing someone from history, both physically and socially. In a time when legacy and honor meant everything, this punishment was worse than death. The person wasn't just killed, they were unborn in the eyes of the state. It showed how powerful the Roman Empire was, using the law not just to end a life, but to erase it completely. Lingqi execution law. In Imperial China, a brutal form of punishment called lingqi, or slow slicing, was used as a legal method of execution. It was reserved for serious crimes like treason, blasphemy, or killing a family member. This law remained active for centuries and was officially abolished only in 1905. The punishment involved slowly cutting the body of the accused in stages, often while they were still alive. The goal wasn't just death, it was humiliation and pain. The number of cuts could reach into the hundreds, and the process could last for hours. Families of the accused were sometimes punished too, facing exile or execution. This law was more than just a death sentence. It was designed to destroy a person physically, mentally, and spiritually. In traditional Chinese beliefs, dying without a whole body could affect the afterlife. Lingqi turned that fear into law. It showed how the justice system could be used not just to punish, but to terrorize and shame, turning execution into a public spectacle of pain. The Buggery Act of 1533. In 1533, under the rule of King Henry VIII, England passed the Buggery Act, one of the first laws in the country to criminalize same-sex relations. The law used the term buggery, a vague word at the time, but it was mainly enforced against men accused of homosexual acts. The punishment was death by hanging. This law wasn't just about morality, it was used as a tool to control and shame people. Accusations often had little proof. In some cases, people were arrested and executed based on rumors or political motives. The law didn't allow for privacy, and once someone was accused, defending yourself was almost impossible. For over 300 years, this law remained in place, with many lives ruined or ended because of who someone loved. Even after the death penalty was removed, same-sex relationships stayed illegal in Britain until the late 20th century. The Buggery Act marked the beginning of centuries of legal discrimination. It turned love into a crime and gave the state the power to punish people simply for being themselves. U.S. eugenic sterilization laws. In the early 1902nd, many U.S. states passed laws that allowed the forced sterilization of people labeled unfit to have children. This included those with mental illness, physical disabilities, people in poverty, and even individuals considered morally weak. These laws were part of the eugenics movement, which falsely believed society could be improved by controlling who could reproduce. One of the most infamous cases was Buck versus Bell in 1927, where the U.S. Supreme Court ruled it was legal to sterilize people without their consent. The court's decision led to over 60,000 forced sterilizations across the country. Victims had no choice, and many didn't even understand what was being done to them. This law destroyed futures and families. It targeted the most vulnerable and was often used in racist and classist ways. Many people were sterilized simply for being poor, Black, or Native American. The government later admitted these actions were wrong, but for thousands of people, it was too late. Their rights were taken in the name of science and backed by law, Justinian law of mutilation. During the 6th century, the Byzantine Empire, under Emperor Justinian and later rulers, used a harsh legal method of punishment, mutilation by law. Instead of long prison sentences, criminals and political enemies were often punished by having body parts removed. This included cutting off noses, tongues, ears, or even blinding someone completely. The idea behind this wasn't just pain, it was control. A mutilated person couldn't serve in government, join the military, or challenge the emperor. In many cases, these punishments were given without a fair trial. The goal was to remove threats quickly and publicly. Blinding was especially common for political rivals, because a blind person was seen as unfit to rule. This turned the justice system into a tool of fear and power. Rather than rehabilitate people, the law focused on shame and permanent damage. These punishments were legal, accepted, and even encouraged by the state. They sent a clear message. Opposition to power would not just be silenced, it would be disfigured for all to see. The Heresy Act of 1554. In 1554, Queen Mary I of England brought back an old law known as the Heresy Act, which made it a crime to hold religious beliefs that went against the teachings of the Catholic Church. Under this law, anyone who rejected the Church's authority could be arrested, tried, and executed, usually by being burned alive. During Mary's short 5-year reign, over 280 Protestants were burned at the stake. These included men, women, and even elderly people. The law gave church officials and the state the legal power to kill people simply for reading the Bible in English or refusing to attend Catholic Mass. This period became known as the Marian persecutions. It was one of the darkest moments in England's religious history. Families were torn apart, and fear spread across the country. The Heresy Act turned personal faith into a legal death sentence. It punished people not for crimes they committed, but for beliefs they held. It showed how religion, when enforced by law, could become a tool of cruelty instead of comfort. Sati. In parts of India before the 19th century, a cruel tradition called sati was practiced and, at times, protected by local laws or ignored by rulers. Under this custom, a widow was expected or even forced to throw herself onto her husband's funeral pyre and be burned alive. It was believed to be an act of loyalty and honor. Although not required by Hindu scripture, sati became socially accepted in some regions. Local leaders and officials often failed to stop it, and in some areas, it was even seen as a noble act. In many cases, women had little choice. They were pressured by family or community, and sometimes physically forced. When the British took control of India, they initially avoided interfering with local customs. But after growing concern and public cases of women being burned against their will, the practice was finally outlawed in 1829 under British rule. Sati was a deadly mix of culture and law. It turned grief into violence and gave tradition the power to end lives legally and publicly. Nazi T. 4 Euthanasia Program. Before the Holocaust began, Nazi Germany introduced a secret law under a program known as Action T4. Starting in 1939, this law allowed doctors to kill people with physical or mental disabilities. The Nazis called it euthanasia, but it was really a system of state-approved murder. The law targeted people who were seen as a burden to society, those who couldn't work, had long-term illnesses, or were born with disabilities. Doctors and nurses were told to report these patients. Once approved, the victims were sent to special clinics, where they were killed using gas chambers, poison, or starvation. Over 275,000 people were murdered under this program, many of them children. Families were often lied to, told their loved ones had died from natural causes. This law turned medicine into a tool of cruelty. It made it legal to kill innocent people based on their health. Even worse, it gave doctors the power to decide who was worth living. It was one of the first steps toward the Holocaust, and it all began with a signature on paper. Francoist child separation law. After Spain's civil war in the late 1932, General Francisco Franco's regime created laws that allowed the state to take children away from families who supported the losing Republican side. These parents were labeled as enemies of the nation and seen as unfit to raise loyal citizens. Under this system, thousands of children were taken from prisons, hospitals, and homes, often while their mothers were still alive. The state placed them with Catholic families or institutions that supported the dictatorship. Many of these children were told their real parents had died or abandoned them. This policy continued for decades. It began as political punishment, but turned into a widespread system of child theft. Some experts estimate that over 30,000 children were taken between the 1942nd and 1952nd. The goal was to erase the influence of Republican ideas by raising the next generation under fascist values. These children lost their families, their names, and their histories, all under legal protection. It was a law that didn't just silence opposition, it rewrote the identities of their children. Manusmriti laws. The Manusmriti, written over 2,000 years ago, is one of the oldest known legal texts in India. It laid out strict rules based on caste, creating a system where people were treated differently depending on the group they were born into. At the top were the Brahmins, priests, and at the bottom were the Shudras, laborers, and Dalits, also known as untouchables. The laws in the Manusmriti were extremely harsh toward lower castes. For example, if a Shudra heard or read sacred texts, they could be punished by having hot oil poured in their ears or their tongue cut out. Inter-caste marriage was forbidden, and touching someone from a lower caste was seen as pollution. These laws were not just cultural, they were enforced through religious authority and local rulers for centuries. They gave legal approval to inequality, violence, and discrimination, all based on birth. Even though modern India has outlawed caste discrimination, the effects of these ancient laws are still felt today in many parts of society. The Manusmriti shows how legal systems can turn social divisions into lifelong punishment. Saudi Arabia's blasphemy laws. In Saudi Arabia, blasphemy is not just a religious issue, it's a legal crime with some of the harshest penalties in the world. Under the country's strict interpretation of Islamic law, insulting the Prophet Muhammad, criticizing Islam, or questioning religious authorities can lead to arrest, long prison sentences, or even the death penalty. These laws don't clearly define what counts as blasphemy. As a result, people have been punished simply for making comments online, writing books, or expressing personal beliefs. Religious minorities and reformers are especially at risk, as their words can be seen as threats to religious unity. Even lawyers, journalists, and human rights activists have faced charges for defending those accused. Trials are often secretive, and accusations can be based on little or no evidence. The fear of blasphemy charges has created a culture of silence. People are afraid to speak, write, or question anything related to religion. In Saudi Arabia, words alone can cost someone their freedom or their life. And because the law protects belief over expression, there is almost no way to defend yourself once accused. Thank you so much for watching this video. And if you gained some knowledge, then please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more future content. Until then, goodbye.